I never really could get behind the idea of universality when it comes to theories of forms. It does seem to apply at the quantum physics level, as our reality follows rules, yet we quite haven't settled on a grand unified theory of everything. Life emerges through long chains of contingency that we recognize because we see the results every day. Life evolves from common ancestors that face similar environmental pressures, leading to similar evolutionary traits. It's sort of silly to casually ignore the history of objects to focus on the particularity of an object. Objects carry long histories of contingency. For all intents and purposes, they sort of act like universals. Past contingencies are the universals of objects in the moment. There's a balance between these historical causal links and a balanced reduction evaluating the tropes or the characteristics of the objects in the moment. In my mind, it's silly to think of physical universal forms similar to Plato's theory of forms. It's also ridiculous to pretend that the objects around us don't share a distant cause, which is as good as a foundational universal. Let's talk about trope nominalism. Trope nominalism is a philosophical view about the nature of properties in universals. It's a version of nominalism which denies the existence of universals, abstract entities that can exist in multiple places at once, like redness or roundness. Instead, trope nominalism posits that properties are particularized entities called tropes. Key features of trope nominalism: particularized properties. Tropes are specific to individual objects. For example, the redness of an apple is not a universal redness shared by all red things, but is instead a unique property, a trope, belonging only to that apple. No universals. There are no universal entities that exist independently of the objects they characterize. Similar objects are considered to share similar tropes rather than being instances of the same universal. Similarity and bundling. Tropes that are qualitatively similar are what give rise to the perception of shared properties. Objects are conceptualized as bundles of tropes. An object like a chair might be composed of tropes like shape, color, texture. Advantages. It avoids the metaphysical complexities of universals by grounding properties in concrete, particular objects. It provides a straightforward way to explain why objects appear to share properties while maintaining their individuality, accounting for similarity. Trope nominalists need to explain how distinct tropes can resemble each other without appealing to universals or relations that themselves might require universals. Identity of indiscernibles. The view must handle cases where objects appear to share all their tropes, raising questions about what distinguishes the objects themselves. I talk a lot about this actually, and it's like, when we say we have two of something, we can't have two of something because two apples are two different apples. What does it take for one apple? What does it take for me to have one apple that's two of the same apple? How do we do that? The apple would have to have the same particles that it has, the original apple. So how can I have two of the same apple with the same particles? It's impossible, right? Unless you posit multiverse. I believe it's the nomic reality of the apple would be the same across the multiverse, right? Then I can have two of the same apple that uses the same particles at the same time in the same space. That's just a speculation, but I'm just saying, otherwise, the notion of having two of the same thing is impossible. It's impossible. While things have similar properties, they don't occupy the same space and they don't occupy the same time. They don't share the same particles that we know. One apple, you can't have two of the same apple. We can appeal to the past, where the apple came from, to how it's emerged from other fruits and stuff, its ancestors, for its universality. Trope nominalism is an important position in metaphysics, offering a concrete and parsimonious approach to understanding properties and their relation to objects. I just did a video covering nominalism itself, but I decided to do this video about trope nominalism separately because I think it's an important distinction. Plato's theory of forms would basically be the opposition to what a trope nominalist might be arguing against. I think it's pretty easy to see that just because some objects are red, that doesn't mean they share a universal redness. We've learned how light works and how perception works, so the notion of a world of perfect forms is going to be silly to us these days. But there is something that is universal-like, but not really universal the way Plato talks about it. If you're talking about life, then when you refer to universality, you're talking about common ancestors. So I think discounting universality can be done if we consider history. If we don't consider historical contingency as part of the identity of the entity in the moment, then whatever idea it is the author's trying to portray, it's not worth perpetuating. It's not worth chasing after it. History expresses itself in the present, and we have to be able to separate the causes that lead to certain tropes. I'm all for this kind of thinking, but again, causation branching will lead you back to a point in the entity's past that for all intents and purposes is the universal causal entity for that particular entity in the future, or what is your current present. So just don't oversimplify universality and let past causal connections be what they are. If you like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.